No problem at all. Hey everyone. As Jim said, part of me kind of volunteering to share this topic is because I'm not an expert in this area, but it's been something that I've heard again and again. And so as I've worked with teams and with individuals and teams making software, I hear this word trust come up a lot. And so my interest in sharing today really is just to deepen my own understanding of it. I'm going to present a few ideas. Some of these I've gleaned from books, some from my own experiences, some from talking to others. But the idea really for me is just that this is an evolving conversation, and would really appreciate. I know people in this group probably have some deep understandings in this area as well. So please share with me so that can help me deepen my understanding and kind of broaden my understanding as well. I wanted to start off with a story, and I've got I'm the proud father of 3 children. My middle daughter Juliet is, well, she's turning 6 now, but she's at the stage where she just loves playing with myself, and she's just like full of energy. And there's a specific game she likes playing with me. The game involves her climbing up on the side of our couch. Now, our couch in our lounge is quite high compared to normal couches. It's kind of probably my waist height. And what she'll do is she'll launch herself into my arms from the edge of this couch. And normally when she plays this game with me, I make a point of standing quite close by. However, there have been a few occasions where I've been quite far away, and this doesn't faze her in the least. What I've established is regardless of where I stand in the room, if I tell her to jump, she just throws herself at me, arms wide open, and has no hesitation that I will catch her. She, in many ways, has absolute trust in me as her father, and that's really humbling right now. It also saddens me that as she gets older, that kind of absolute trust is going to fade away, and at some point, she's going to think, well, can Daddy catch her if he's standing 4 meters away? Like, what are the chances of that happening? And double think. But for now, her trust is blind. As adults, we live in a different world. We live in a risk-aware and risk-adverse world. And in many ways, we also have a hyper-caution, a culture of hyper-caution, where we have taught people, and for good reason, that trust is not blind and that we need to evaluate and understand trust. Now, something I've learned around trust is high-performing teams have high trust and low-performing teams have low trust. So this word trust is really important for how a team performs, and it doesn't matter whether it's sport or whether it's software. A common component of performance is this element of trust. Now, something I've seen from the impact of a lack of trust is just some of the people dynamics that come into play that hinder us from being successful, that hinder us from high performance. Some examples I can think back to is team members not being able to work together with each other because they don't trust each other. So have the skills, have the abilities, there's just this element of trust that prevents them from being effective. also come across teams not being able to work with other teams because of lack of trust, where one team will kind of second guess what the intentions of the other team is, and will just create this barrier where there's friction involved. And I believe trust is a component that's causing that friction. I've also seen people leaving organizations because they don't trust their leaders. Um, I've seen that with close colleagues where they've decided to work elsewhere because of a lack of trust of the leader at that time. And I've also seen people being kind of nudged out of organizations because their leaders don't trust them. So on the reverse, where a leader's looking at a member of their team and going, I don't trust that that person can actually perform, that they're going to work and operate in this team. So the impact from a lack of trust is people being ineffective, people leaving organizations, um, people not really second guessing. There is definitely a tax that comes in that you pay when there is a lack of trust. So with that said, it led me to think, well, trust is kind of a bad word because it means it has different elements to it. And depending on the scenario, there's different components that make up the word trust. What would be the components if I was to kind of break that word trust up into smaller bits? What exactly would make up that word trust? How could I look at trust? And when somebody says, I don't trust this person, or I don't trust this leader, or I don't trust this organization, how could we look at that objectively and go, well, what aspect of trust, what aspect or what component of trust is lacking? How can we fix that? How can we help increase somebody's confidence or help increase their trust? And so today I'm going to just share a bit of a formula that I've taken and adjusted from different areas to try and put a formula on trust so you can look at the different components. And the first part of trust that I want to recognize is the component of competence. So for me, competent means that somebody has the ability, knowledge, and skills to perform an action successfully. And competence is really the first element to trust. Often I think of competence, I can interchange it with capability. Is this person capable of doing the thing that we're expecting them to do? Is this person capable or competent at doing X? And I would say that if you said that they weren't competent, that you would struggle to trust them in that capability. So competence has to be there somewhere, but competence isn't the only aspect of trust. It's just one element of it. There is another dimension of trust, and it comes from people that I've worked with that were extremely competent or capable to do what they were tasked with doing, yet I didn't trust them. And I had one experience a while back at a different organization where I was working with someone who, for me, was really treating me as a resource. So they were competent at what they were doing. They had the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to perform the task at hand. In fact, in that particular relationship, they were in many ways one of my leaders. And their communication, though, when they interacted with me, it was professional, but that was where it ended. It was very transactional. And so for me, this kind of touched on an element of trust which I believe is warmth. And for me, what I mean by warmth is um, it's how you feel towards somebody. It's that warmth, that connection that you feel to them. Now, warmth is an important element to create trust in my mind. I don't believe this is as universal. So I've seen warmth play a bigger role in different cultures. So there's a cultural element to warmth. Um, and uh, I do believe warmth has an impact on how we trust somebody. So if you are warm to somebody, if you feel that connection, um, you're led to trust them more than if they're not warm towards you. Now, there are people that are extremely warm and competent that I do not trust. Um, and I thought of a good example of this. Um, and the example I have, and I say this with a lot of love and caring towards them, but I have some extended family that is extremely competent, that I love, that they're warm towards me. But if you asked me if I trusted them to be on time to any family gathering, I would tell you no, I do not. And that's because time and time again, they've proven unreliable in getting to a family gathering on time. So another aspect of trust is reliability. Um, Somebody can be competent, they can be warm, but if they keep kind of breaking their promises in that aspect, you may not trust them as much. Um, and so that introduces the third element around trust for me, and this is reliability. And I think reliability, a good example is if you want to see a team that in software that is not delivering reliably, you'll see that their leaders and their stakeholders will lose trust in them very, very quickly. So competence, warmth, and reliability all play different elements in trust. And missing one or the other can impact how we trust somebody. So moving on from warmth, reliability, and competence, another aspect I believe that leads to a increase in trust is results. Now, originally when I put these slides together, ironically, I had a picture of Lance Armstrong. And it was a little ironic because in many ways he lost a lot of trust and kind of was seen as deceiving almost the entire world. But for a long time, he had a lot of trust, a lot of respect from people. And I believe that was because of the results that he was delivering. And I believe results can increase the trust that people have. So I believe results needs to be on that table, needs to be another element of trust that's extremely important. Now, something that I've found with results is results is an indication that people are able to accomplish what they've been hired to do. What results means for me within the software space is be on time and be within constraints. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. If you're doing that, you're not producing results. Don't make excuses for not delivering. Like, results matter. Now that can seem hard because we know that there are a lot of external factors that can impact one's ability to deliver results. But if a team or an individual is consistently not producing results, it is going to impact the trust that you have in them. So for me, results is just as important an element of trust as competence, warmth, and reliability. The hard part that I have around results is they're often outside of your control. And often we put this emphasis on results, which is results at all costs. And the challenge that you have there is often you will cut corners to produce results that can also have an impact in the trust that you have in somebody. So I believe that results has to be part of the equation, but it is there's this balance and this tension between them and the other elements. The other element that I want to propose as part of this equation of trust is an element I've called self-orientation. Now, there are people that are extremely warm, competent, and reliable that I do not trust. And these are people that, for me, have a high self-orientation. Now, what do I mean by that? An example that's probably pretty stereotypical from my viewpoint is a real estate agent. They're trained to be extremely friendly. They're competent. There's some compliance to make sure that they know what they're doing, that they know the legislation around selling properties, that they know property law. They're reliable. I recently went through a process of purchasing our first home, and the estate agents, if they said that they were going to be at the house to meet you, they were there. They always send you the paperwork on time. There's no question around reliability from that aspect. Yet, do I trust them? And the answer is not a chance. What's missing for me with an estate agent is the element of the self-orientation. They're incentivized in such a way that I'm never quite sure if they're putting their personal interests of getting a sales commission over my own interests of getting a good deal for a property. And so it is quite possible to have results, be warm, be competent, and if you miss out on that self-orientation aspect, you're going to struggle. Like you could still lack trust. So seeing where somebody's self-orientation comes from is really, really important. And I think that there are quite a few industries out there where we can look at that industry and just say the way that they're geared towards, the way that they're incentivized is an indication that even though they have all these other elements, that we just fundamentally don't trust them because of the self-orientation, because of how they're incentivized and what's the driving factor of them doing that work. So self-orientation is really important. So the way I've put the formula is warmth, competence, reliability, and results all matter. So I've put that as the numerator. Self-orientation, I believe, is the denominator. And why I think that's important is I believe that self-orientation has an almost order of magnitude impact around trust. So if there's a lack of self-orientation, there's going to be a severe lack of trust. And self-orientation is also quite a hard one to break up. In a book called The Speed of Trust, written by a guy called Stephen, I think it was Stephen M. Covey, not to be confused with Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I think Stephen M. Covey was the son of Stephen Covey. He wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And he kind of delved into the self-orientation, and he said for him, self-orientation was motive, agenda, and intent. And the way he looked at that is motive, it's like why are they doing it? The agenda, like, is there any sort of hidden agenda behind why they're doing it? What's the intent? What were they intending to be the result? And if you look at those elements, like it can lead to just a deeper understanding of self-orientation. So if your motive is to kind of deceive, that's an indication that's part of self-orientation. If your intent was good, but maybe your execution was poor, that's an indication that you have a low self-orientation and maybe a little more trustworthy in that element. Okay, so the formula, or for me, the trust equation that I really like is warmth, the connection that you have with people, competence, like do they have the knowledge, ability, skills to perform the task or requirement, reliability, can you rely on them? Will they keep commitments? Will they be on time? Will, if they say something, will they do it? The results, so either present results or past results. In fact, often past results is a indicator, leading indicator around trust. Like, will you take a bet on them, or you trust them to do this new piece of work? And then all of that divided by self-orientation. Okay, so that's the trust equation that I wanted to share with this group. At this point, maybe it's before I continue, are there any questions around that, or any parts before I move into how do we build this up?
There are a couple of questions in the chat, Mark. One of them is around the notion that different elements may carry different weights.
Yes.
I think you answered that partly. Well, partly you've said the self-orientation will be quite weightful.
Yeah, okay. So let me go through some of the questions in the chat, and then I'll carry on. So there was a question around, is warmth related to psychological safety with somebody? And I believe it is. My definition of warmth, I would put it in the same sort of boundary as psychological safety. In many ways, like the psychological safety for me is like, do you feel safe enough to share some vulnerabilities? I believe warmth leads to somebody feeling comfortable in sharing and opening up. So I would say there is a relationship there. The I see Anna said, I'd like to class it more like approachability. And I think that approachability is another really, really good word. I think you could kind of interchange warmth and approachability. And I also think that there's an element of whether this is trust from a leader or trust from a somebody more like a co-worker. So there is an element of like, what is the relationship like? And depending on that, different words would all indicate the same. There is a question from Shadi which says, which element carries the most weight? Or they're all equally important to me. And just to answer that, for me, self-orientation plays the biggest element in trust. These are all important components, but that self-orientation is probably the biggest thing. And I'll come a little later to like when we've lost trust, how do we build it up? And you'll see the weighting there, which will kind of help answer that, Shadi. Sherry said, perhaps there are different spheres, applications of trust. You may trust a real estate agent to line up properties for you to see as whereas you wouldn't trust a family member to help you buy a property because they won't get to the listing appointments. Yeah, Sherry, I think you're spot on in that. Anthony said, I guess the definition of results is a factor. If there isn't a shared agreement on what a good result looks like, then trust may be lost. Yep. Again, ironically, in my role, which is around really delivery and people, results plays a big factor. Yet, I personally put less of an emphasis on results because I believe that those other aspects around competence, reliability, if you get those right, results eventually come. And if you aren't getting those things right consistently, then you're either extremely unlucky and there are a lot of external factors, or there's a question around competence. So I know this formula presented is very clean cut, but there's relationships between these words and there's still overlap. Then Stephanie said, could the weight for each component be different for each person? And maybe a key to this is in establishing the weight per person. I think you're absolutely right in that. In some cultures, the word that I've used around warmth would play much less of a component, whereas in other cultures, other aspects may be less important. I can think of cultures that put an emphasis on connection, putting more of an emphasis on warmth, and maybe being willing to take more of a bet around competence, or more of a risk factor or tolerance around, like, does this person have the skills and ability, or do we feel that we have enough of a connection that we will let them grow in the role or the task. And then from, oh yes, so Rodrigo, your question around, is this framework aligned with the book, The Trusted Advisor? So in The Trusted Advisor, they presented a trust equation. This is very, very similar to what's presented in that book, although there are some differences. Now, I haven't read through the Trusted Advisor, but I have seen some material that I gleaned off the internet on that. I would say from a resource background, the two major roles were the Trusted Advisor and then the Speed of Trust. So I found the Speed of Trust also quite interesting to read, and this is kind of a combination of both of those. Okay. The last one before I move on was, Anna, does it also depend on what you need in that moment to be delivered? You may need one or two aspects and still trust the person will deliver what you need more of. Absolutely. In fact, I think time and how long that relationship is going to exist can play an absolute factor in the weighting of these components. So for instance, in something where there isn't an enduring relationship, warmth may not play as big a factor. Self-orientation may not play as big a factor. If, like in software, like if it's a really, really short-term thing and you just need delivery on it, and there is no longer-term relationship, like I may look at somebody that is more competent, more reliable, more results-driven, but trust in the fact that their self-orientation or why they're doing that work may be more, their self-orientation may be higher. So I think that there is also a component around what the period and what type of relationship is going on. So all great points, and thank you in asking them. It's helped me also get some insights into this. So I'm gonna move on now, and then we can jump. Steve, do you have a practical example of how you've used this format to help you out? I'll come to that. In fact, I'll tackle that right now. So an exercise that I did was, and it's a really interesting exercise to do, is just to look at your work colleagues and do a rating on 1 to 10, where 10 is like very, very, or 1 to 5, where 5 is very, very, very high and 1 is very, very low, and rate them in these different elements. So rate them on a level of warmth, rate them on a level of competence, reliability, results, and self-orientation, and do that with like 5 colleagues, and then apply the formula and you'll get an end total. And what was interesting when I did that was I saw a correlation between my overall rating and how I actually trusted different colleagues. So I'd seen a correlation between that. It's not foolproof, but go through the exercise yourself and see what you end up with. And I would be surprised if you get a vastly different result. And I think that these elements would indicate trust as a number of some sorts. Okay, I'm going to move on. So the next question is, how do we build up trust? And there's some practices I would expect most or many people in this group to have a lot of experience in these practices. But there are a couple that I believe help build these aspects. And the first is, and I've pulled this, so I pulled this from two areas, from Radical Candor, but also from the book Speed of Trust, where he talks about talking straight. So in the Speed of Trust, he says, just like the phrasing he put behind it, he said, be honest, tell the truth, let people know where you stand, use simple language, demonstrate integrity, don't manipulate or distort facts, don't spin truth, don't leave false impressions. So this talking straight for me, it's how we communicate. Like, I believe that is a really, really important factor in building trust up. And I kind of draw a connection between that talk straight and the radical candor, which is that element of caring personally and challenging directly. So it's not talking around the fact. It is not manipulating. It's not being aggressive. Like the sweet spot is where you care personally, but you're direct in what you're challenging. And for those that aren't familiar with the Radical Candor, there's a book called Radical Candor, great resource. There's some great videos about it. And the question there is around, obviously we want to be in the radical candor. That's where we want to operate and focus. But if we weren't in the radical candor, what quadrant would we prefer to deal with people? And obviously, well, for me, the next quadrant is the obnoxious aggression. So ideally, I want to work with people that care personally and challenge directly. But if not, then at least I want to know where I stand, and that's where people challenge directly. But if they don't care personally, at least you know where you stand. Interesting enough, the most dangerous place or quadrant to operate in is the ruinous empathy quadrant, because that's where you get blindsided. That's where you think everything's great, you think you know where everybody stands, and then the next second, Johnny, who actually maybe hasn't had anybody practice radical candor or challenge directly, feels that he's got this empathy with people, that there's this connection, and all of a sudden, when there's redundancies, he's the first person to go, and he never saw it coming. So this ruinous empathy for me is the worst place to stand, because that's where you feel that you actually have trust with people, and you don't, because they're playing games with you. Another, I was thinking this morning around it, and another place where I think this, it's either manipulative insincerity or ruinous empathy, is the TV show Survivor. So in the early days of Survivor, for those that have watched Survivor, like I remember watching season 1, which probably shows my age, but in season 1 of Survivor, like there was this focus around like everybody trying to get on with everybody and pretend like everything was all right, and they were all operating in this ruinous empathy where they wouldn't challenge things, and you thought you were great until you got blindsided at tribal council. And it's interesting how Survivors evolved, because it's kind of moved from ruinous empathy to manipulative insincerity, and either kind of sat there or in the radical candor space. And it's interesting each season to see whether radical candor wins or manipulative insincerity wins. Often manipulative insincerity gets you to the finals, but it's the radical candor that makes you the winner. Okay, so talking straight is really important. The other practice is making your intents clear. So let others know what you're going to do before you're doing it. This gives them predictability. Using language like I intend to just kind of projects and allows people to get an indication of where you're going and what the direction is. If you think of self-orientation, I spoke around intentions being an element of self-orientation. Like making your intent really clear just helps clarify where your self-orientation sits. And this is some language, again, from a resource side from Turner Ship around. I spoke around making the intentions clear just leads to empowering people to ultimately get to a point where they're empowered to make decisions because they're projecting their intention and they don't have to live in this approval environment the whole time. So making intents clear, really, really important. The language there is a great language to foster to help increase trust. On the other end of it is seeking feedback and then improving. And what I always like to do is to build feedback systems. And now we talk about feedback systems in software from a systems perspective, but there are the people feedback systems as well. Creating a culture where people regularly ask others for feedback and then just listen and don't get defensive. For me, feedback is always a gift. I believe that feedback and listening and just hearing what people are seeing helps you either understand where they are or it helps you understand what they believe your intentions are. Now, when you're asking for feedback, a lesson I've learned is be specific on the type of feedback you want. A couple of years back, I was leading a team, and I thought I'd be really clever in my catch-ups with people. I would ask for feedback, and the first time I asked for feedback, I didn't really frame what type of feedback I wanted. And the person I was having a catch-up, I put them on the spot. So lessons with feedback, give them time to prepare, frame it, and make it a safe space. I didn't give them time to prepare. I didn't frame the type of feedback. I just said, hey, I'd like to know what feedback can you give me on how I can improve as a leader? And there was this awkward silence. And then she turned around and said to me, well, I really think that you need to brush your hair when you come in the morning because it's kind of messy. And it was totally unexpected. Lucky with age, that problem has solved itself. But framing the type of feedback you want and being specific on the feedback and what areas just gives people an opportunity to focus and to think. So be aware of that, but creating a feedback culture is really important, and always thanking people for feedback and then acting on it is important. Now, there was a question from Matthew saying, do you find direct challenge can be difficult without trust already in place? I believe the right language is as important way to overcome this. Yes. So Matthew kind of, it depends. Now, my background is I'm South African. I've been told South Africans are fairly direct. So there's a cultural element to this. I know of some other cultures where appreciating, where it's totally acceptable to challenge things directly from day one. Whereas in other cultures, it's you kind of need to kind of soften that. South African or Dutch, yep, there is a strong correlation there. So there's a cultural aspect around that. And I also think it's how you react when you are challenged directly, which just reinforces certain behaviors and makes people feel either safe to trust you going forward or not. So if there is a direct challenge, and you are really, I guess, not considerate or don't handle that well, that can erode trust, and erode the ability for them to challenge again. Sherry said the three quadrants other than radical candor seem to link with personality types, natural tendency, whereas radical candor and the communication techniques to improve trust seem to be a deliberate choice skill you can learn to no matter what personality type you are. But I haven't thought about that. That's really interesting, Sherry. The I'll let that conversation around personality types just carry on in the chat channel. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that. Moving on, how do you repair trust? So I had a situation recently, and I'll share it on this group, where I broke someone's trust, and I broke it quite deeply. It wasn't my intention, and when it wasn't my intention, although I had done something really stupid in a leadership role, and it had an impact. It had an impact in a direct report, and had an impact on one of my team members. And it was interesting to me because I'd spent time kind of investing in trust, trying to understand these different aspects of it. And then somebody in one of my teams has said, you've like fundamentally broken my trust in you, and this is going to take a while to repair. And it cut me really deep. It was actually an extremely emotional week for me because I recognized that I had done something stupid, that it was all on me, and now I had actually impacted the ability for somebody to work with me effectively. So when we have these situations, because sometimes we do break trust, and sometimes we do it out of inexperience, sometimes we do it because we're not thinking. How do we repair that? Well, I think we can look back to that trust formula and kind of ask the question, where did trust break down? Like what component of trust did we break down? And the big one to call out here is there is a time span in repairing trust. Now, I talk about this in the speed of trust, but interesting enough, results is probably the easiest thing to fix. I'll give you an example. A team is not delivering. You intervene. They start delivering. Trust is almost repaired instantly from the day that they start delivering again. So for me, results is a very short time span to repair. Reliability as well, while it takes a little longer, there are a couple times that there's kind of a pattern you need to prove. Often as humans, we tend to be quite forgiving around results and reliability. We like if there's been a recognition that trust has been lost, and you can see people are actively working at adjusting that, like we'll offer that trust back to them really, really quickly. Competence, I've put competence a little further down the time because competence is often an indication of a lack of skills or knowledge or ability, and that can take time. Especially in the software space where competence and experience takes time to build. It's one of the reasons why we make the mistake of linking experienced roles to the length of time that you've been in the industry, because we believe that that competence almost just naturally builds up if somebody's been around longer. So you can improve trust with, you can repair trust if there's a lack of competence, but it's going to take some time to build those skills in the person. Warmth and self-orientation, not so easy. Warmth or connection can be fixed. I think there, for me at least, I want to see that over a period of time. Like if somebody tries to connect or be warm, like the first time they try that, I'm going to second guess them. I'm going to be skeptical of it. I'm going to be skeptical of the genuineness behind it. So I believe that warmth and connection and safety, all of that area, there is a longer time frame involved in it, and self-orientation probably takes the longest. If somebody's intentions are incorrect, if they have a high self-orientation, in my experience, it takes a really long time for them to prove that self-orientation has changed, that they're being genuine. So repairing trust, it's an element of like addressing like the behavior or adjusting how you're interacting. But then there's also this awareness of the period of time that it's going to take to adjust on that. Now, I'm just looking, Anna says, does breaking trust mean doing something wrong in either of the 5 elements? In all of them, what is your opinion? I believe that this equation isn't complete, that there are lots of other aspects, but like I said, you can break it in a specific area, and addressing that area can repair trust. And I've seen that to happen a few times. Okay, so with that, I am going to just kind of wrap up and go really sharing it to this group to go to questions or any other thoughts anybody wants to share. So Jim, I think you've put the question, how do you know if you've broken trust?
Yeah. You don't get that feedback.
Well, I guess they're different elements. My experience is there's a mass exodus of resignations can often lead to an indication that you have a problem in trust if you don't have earlier indications. Like trust is so fundamental to us as humans that we don't want to work with people that we don't trust.
Mark, do you think you can build trust? So put people together, they will typically take a while to trust each other. Do you think there are things you can do to create that trust quicker, to speed up the process?
Yeah. So I think especially in the agile space, like we've kind of started to focus on how do we ramp teams up really quickly, and there's a big focus in my mind around people and connections and a shared understanding, a shared journey. So I mean, like journey lines, mapping out where people have come, why they're here, what are their intentions, what are they looking for. Those are all tools and techniques to accelerate that kind of forming an alignment to get to the point where you go, I kind of trust that person and we'll give them some slack. So those are the things I've seen. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
So I think Sherry is saying, well, Sherry, do you want to tell us about it? You turn on your microphone or?
Sure. I think, Mark, you spoke about that person who said it's going to take a long time to rebuild trust. There's a difference in breaking trust when you didn't really mean to, and breaching trust where that was your intent. And I think if you're doing it from a place of it wasn't intended, I don't know if it's terribly fair to say to you, it's all on you, mate, to win back my trust. I think we've just got to have reasonable expectations of human beings and not put them on pedestals and expect them to meet our very high expectations. So my comment there was to say, if we have regular check-ins like family meetings, so to speak, it just gives time for people to clear the air and say, you know, I was expecting A to happen, instead I got B. You know, help me understand where that sort of came from. And then it gives you a chance to say that wasn't my intention. And now that I know, I'm going to put that right. And that's it.
Yeah. And for me, the element there that really resonates with me is putting people on pedestals. And when there's the bigger the delta between the pedestal that you've put them on and who they actually are, like the bigger the difference, or the bigger the impact and trust. And like the analogy I could think of is the scoundrel that lives down the road that you expect bad behaviors from. You kind of can work with them because that's the expectation, but someone who's seen as kind of spotless and just like really, really perfect, like if they do something wrong, like it's the whole community's up in arms. And so there's this element of putting people up on pedestals. And I think just looking in the comments, like that being vulnerable and so I'm probably coming more from a leadership angle, but some of the leaders that I've respected the most have been the ones that have been vulnerable in going, hey, I did this, and you know, that was a mistake. That's actually led to me trusting them more because it's reduced the delta in kind of me putting them up on this pedestal and going, okay, this is actually a human, and we can relate. And I think we as humans have this just tendency to look at certain roles or certain people and put them up on pedestals, and that sets us up for just unrealistic expectations. So yeah, great insights, Sherry. Any other thoughts or insights?
There's a bit of a theme around nurturing trust, that it isn't just, you know, got it, trust, thank you. But it's something that needs to be nurtured a little bit. So what's your thoughts on that?
I haven't really thought about that, other than I guess there's an element of, I'll share an experience. So I'm a very trusting person in general. My partner is very skeptical around motivations, and this has actually led to a great marriage, because my wife will kind of balance out my my willingness to just give trust. And so I think that there is a personality aspect in this where some people are more skeptical than others, and the extremes, either extreme is not healthy. So we can't be skeptical of everybody, because it's unrealistic to, like, you just can't operate at that point. And there are some players that will take advantage, and so there's some element of you can't trust everybody. So there is a human element there that I think is impacted largely. And I'm not a psychologist, but I put money on the fact that it's probably impacted by, like, when we were kids growing up and things our parents did and mistakes that we made. So that's kind of my thoughts around kind of the element of, like, just where do we start with trust, and just how often or how easily we extend that out.
I'm just wondering, Mark, around when a team is being formed. So you might be a servant leader of that team, or you just might be part of that team. And it's obviously would be a low trust at that beginning point. So what are some of the things practically you can do? Because you probably struggle to deliver results as well in a new team. So what are some of the things that you could suggest we do to kind of just gradually build up that trust? Like, would you target some parts of that quadrant, or what would you do?
So what I've done in the past is just really focused on the intentions of the people joining the teams, and a tool that I've leveraged quite a bit is moving motivators. Is it called moving motivators? It's effectively like what are the internal drivers for people. I found that that's been a really good activity to get out, like what are people optimizing for early on, which just creates more of an understanding of why people's behaviors are coming in. So interesting enough, I actually used that tool as a technique for interviewing. So even before we've brought people in, we'll do moving motivators with them, and they'll talk through like what's important to us, because we want to understand why they want to work with us. The other activity, it was such a simple one, was, and I didn't lead this, but it was just a question that I saw so somebody was bootstrapping a team, and he just spent a day with the team, and they just answered a really simple question, which is, why are they here? Like, why are you here, and what's important for you to be checked in? And the team spent a day on that. It was interesting in them answering just those two questions. It became quite apparent that that team wasn't going to work, because there were some fundamental differences in what people needed to be checked in that team. And we actually ended up breaking that team up into two and forming two separate teams. So that was another technique that I really liked seeing done, that I didn't lead. Does anybody else have any suggestions?
I think there's that good old safe standby of just forming an agreement of what everyone's committed to and what expectations are of each other. So, you know, a lot of people have a meeting in their head, and then the implication is you've all attended the meeting, and really they've never aired their expectations out loud, and you've never said, yes, you will do that. But if we can all agree what we expect of each other, and people actually commit to do those things, then I think it's easier going forward, isn't it?
Yep. While I'm kind of while we're kind of talking in the tool space, I would be doing myself an injustice not to push my golden hammer, which is gradients of agreement. I've just found that tool in driving conversations to kind of uncover what people understand of things is such a powerful tool, because what I've seen where teams have formed contracts, and you kind of ask the team, like, are you happy with this? The yes or no just doesn't take you far enough. And so gradients, you can kind of Google it. I think the work came from a guy called Sam Kano, who put some work around a really good book called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. Gradients is just a really effective tool for kind of navigating that conversation and seeing where on the gradient somebody sits. So I found that in conversations where alignment and shared understanding is really important, using a tool like gradients of agreement just really shines. Okay, so I think we've been going for an hour. Jim, how are we doing in our timing?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably we can carry on this conversation outside of the meeting through the meetup group if you want to. a lot of what you said has really resonated with me. It's quite cool because I have all these ideas floating around. And you've kind of articulated them, which has been nice. And of course, you know, my mathematical inclination enjoyed your equation, although I probably would have made it a differential equation, but you know, can't have your...
Well, in all fairness, this has been stolen and borrowed from everyone
I totally
else. This is
understand
not
that.
this is not my work.
Yes, but what you're really doing though is putting it into a context, I think, and explaining it in a way where you can see a good progression of developing a mental model for the idea of trust around that equation, and then looking at how you could use that as a diagnostic, if you like, potentially, as well as a way of building trust as a progression, and then even repairing trust if it gets broken. So, you know, I really like that whole progression of being able to do that, and appreciate you sharing your insights as always.
Yeah, well, thank you for those that have kind of participated. Like from my end, this is a journey. So even just the questions and the comments have been pretty insightful and going to make me think. If you do have more thoughts around this and would like to engage, please just reach out. Like this is an area that I'm really interested in understanding better. And then just, I guess, to Agile Auckland, thank you for the opportunity to let me share these thoughts. It's been great meeting with you all.
Cool, thank you. So just a quick plug for Agile Auckland next week. So it's at Genesis Energy's new building. So the meetup is all up there. And they'll be talking about Scrum at scale Genesis Energy style. I know quite a few of the people at Genesis Energy, and it will be a great talk, I'm sure. They've got some great insights out there, so definitely worth attending. And it's a continual problem as soon as you've got more than one team, isn't it? How do we coordinate all these teams and coordinate the work getting to them? So definitely encourage you to come along to next week's session as well. And thanks again, Mark, and hope to see you all at the next session, if not before. Cool. Thanks a lot.
Cheers,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim.
Hi, Steve.